Hi, welcome to Cure America again with Star Parker. And it appears that New York City is becoming a prime example of what not to do to revitalize a poor community. So I'm glad you're joining me because we need to cure America. New York City's unemployment rate stands at 16%, double the nation's average. Even the liberal New York Times recently screamed a headline, "We're at war. New York City faces a financial abyss." Yet in the midst of tremendous financial headache, the animosity of New York's elite remains undeterred in its hostility to free enterprise, entrepreneurship, the pillars of job creation and economic recovery. In a latest example, a commercial development firm has pulled out of a proposed project called Industry City that it was estimated to bring in 20,000 jobs and $100 million of tax revenues into New York City. After several years of fighting opposition to get approval for rezoning that would have made this project possible, they just threw in the towel. The project was slated to bring 1 million square foot of commercial, retail, and community space into the area, according to the firm's CEO. But not now. Interesting, because the Brooklyn neighborhood where the development would have taken place, Sunset Park, has a poverty rate per 2018 statistics of 29%. That's before COVID. But liberal disdain for capitalism far exceeds their alleged concern about poverty. The city councilman who represents the district and led the fight against the project celebrated the announcement of its demise. He said, "What the community wants is not a private developer with private money to come in and bail out a neighborhood." His name is Councilman Carlos Menchaca. He said, "They really want the city of New York to come in and say, we're going to bring capital infrastructure funding to bring in the Green New Deal at a city level, to really bring jobs that are connected to our community and in our community's vision." Really? I'm wondering, did he poll the unemployed people there before he killed the project to find out if they wanted jobs now? Or did they want to wait indefinitely for folks in D.C. to pass some law for some new Green Deal? Especially while current deficit projections for New York State and New York City are at $14.5 billion and $9 billion, respectively. Neither New York State Governor Cuomo nor their city mayor, de Blasio, you've heard a whole lot about him lately, they didn't have a word of positive to say about the project. And the four of the New York City congressmen, the most outspoken congressmen from that district, the Democrats that are here in Washington, they weighed in heavily against the project. You know what's interesting is that the development firm behind the project, Jamestown, has an established track record of successes in New York City. It developed Chelsea Market in New York City's Lower Manhattan, and Chelsea Market, according to reports, attracts some 500,000 locals and tourists every month. In 2018, Jamestown sold Chelsea Market to Google for $2.4 billion. So I thought we should think about how to plan a local community this week on Cure America. I have some real important guests because I have some really critical questions. Like, does job development in our nation's poor communities really need a heavy oversight and management from the federal government? Or there's another question. Is there a balanced way for business interests to revitalize a neighborhood without displacing low-income renters? Why would a local city councilman want to wait for a Green New Deal when a big business development project is right there knocking on his door? These are very interesting questions, and they're causing a whole lot of concern and debate. So you will hear from my distinguished panel to help us sort through the noise of the news to find some truth. And I'm really excited to dive into this discussion with you, and we will right after this very important message. local people can take care of themselves when it comes to developing their communities. So I have some really special guests to interview today. Pastor Duggar, you've met before. He is a senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Capitol Heights, Maryland. Thank you for returning to be here to tell your story. I really want to hear what is happening out there in Capitol Heights. And another special guest, Dr. Robert Cristiano, who Dr. Bob is the co-founder of Capstone AP3, a Maryland-based development company. He's developed master planned communities as large as 10,000 acres. He's built apartments, homes, offices, and rental centers as small as 10,000 square feet. He's a professor at Georgetown University. I know both men, and I didn't know they knew each other. And you're going to be fascinated to hear their story of how they met. Because, Doctor, welcome. I want to tell you, welcome to Dr. Bob. And this is just incredible that the two of you would meet, because when I met Pastor Duggar and he told me about the changes that were going on in his community, I said, why don't you get involved? You're a church, you have property. If they're going to move your community, you should be at the table. And tell us a little bit about your story, and then how did you meet Dr. Bob?
Yes, thank you again, Star, for inviting me. I came about knowing about the Opportunity Zone through Cure, and which has just been a blessing. And so I ended up, while I was at Cure, I had the conversation with you, and you said, Pastor Doug, I want you to go back and get involved. After introducing me and telling me about the Opportunity Zone, and you said you should go and talk to your governor and all these people. I talked to them, and I got a call from the town hall across the street, which is across the street from me, and they said, listen, we heard you want to do a project. So we have a relationship with Georgetown University, which was Professor Bob, and they say, well, how about we sending you one of our students, come down, and they can do a feasibility study for you. Well, the feasibility study won't cost you anything. The student can get their grade and graduate, and you can get a feasibility study done for free.
Wow.
And so Dr. Bob called me, and that's how I met Dr. Bob.
Because you were doing development business already. You make actually a calling on your life, it seems, to go in and help churches revitalize their community by using their property. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my experience working with faith-based development began in 2005 when I was trying to find in California a way to employ my son, who was going to graduate from USC. Okay. And I came up with the idea of building on excess church land affordable housing because it made sense to me as a good fit. And the crisis, the recession of 2007 hit. My son had to move away to Austin, Texas to get a job, and the idea faded away until I relocated here to take over a business in Washington, D.C. And then I decided to go back into solo practice myself, and I met the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, which introduced me to Pastor Duggar.
Pastor Duggar. And then you were at Georgetown University teaching these concepts of real estate, and what a fit to have students. I want to back up, have students do the feasibility study, because I want to back up Pastor Duggar, because I think an important part of the story is that your city had determined they were going to move their town. They were going to move downtown, change the dynamics, which then put you right in the center. And what normally happens when cities try to what some call gentrify, as if it's a negative, everybody thinks we're all out of here, we got to go somewhere else. But you didn't. You came, you spoke to me, I said, why don't you try this? And as a result, now you're building what?
Well, right now we proposed a 76-unit senior living facility.
Wow.
And actually it's mixed use. On the bottom will be retail.
Wow.
And we have a community kitchen. And in addition, we also have an educational component from the ages K through 12, where we're working with some other entities like Maryland University and a colleague of ours that's in Singapore. And so they're teaching some new math. So when the students come out, they'll be ready to go into companies like Intel and Google.
This is incredible. Dr. Bob, you mentioned to me that you had a passion for this because you were concerned about some of the things that you saw as a Christian person in these communities. Now what we're seeing in New York, they've driven another business out. They've decided, in fact, the headline of the paper, New York politicians decide to keep a Brooklyn neighborhood poor. A proposed waterfront redevelopment would have been creating thousands of jobs, and the city would have to pay nothing. Why aren't more people hearing about opportunities that you've made available and doing something about it so they pretty much revitalize their own communities?
Well, I like to think that our program of these free studies for churches and communities is the best kept secret in town. Because Georgetown has always had a charter of helping disadvantaged communities, neighborhoods, and individuals. So they are very much behind what we're doing, but they don't advertise it or promote it. So when I came and took over the Capstone program, I reached out to church groups and the agencies like the Redevelopment Agency and the Economic Development Corporation, because they know the folks that have the opportunities. And in the last 2 years, we've done 26 feasibility studies for Prince George's County alone.
Wow.
And the bulk of those have been faith-based development.
This must be encouraging to your church. What are they thinking about, some of the members there that have thought that you were going to have to pack your bags and move and allow someone else to just come into the community and develop it?
Well, first of all, we were not going to move because Old Central Avenue, where our church is located, that at one time, years ago, it used to be downtown Capitol Heights until they put in Central Avenue. And so, but we was just kind of curious as to what we were going to do, because not having the finances and resources to do what we wanted to do, God was always up to something. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Wow.
When the EDC called me and Dr. Bob called me, that got the wheels in motion. So the church and the community is excited about potentially what's getting ready to take place.
Well, you know how excited I am, because I look at it like this. I just said, hey, why don't you do this? I'm not tired of everybody pretending that they can't handle their own neighborhoods and they keep wanting big government. I'm here to reduce the size and scope of government. So it was interesting that as it started developing out, but this has not been without challenge. Tell us a little bit about what you've run into now that you've gotten into the weeds of trying to redevelop this community.
Well, the message of opportunity zones and the message of bringing development dollars back into these communities has not really filtered down to staff.
Okay.
And in many cases, staff has the same anti-development posture.
Staffing where now? You're talking in the city governments
within
and in the
city, county,
okay.
Government.
Apparatus.
And so we're trying to build an affordable housing project, which has tremendous need. And there isn't any regard for what we're trying to do with staff versus if we were trying to build a $100 million condominium project with $1 million condos. Their attitude is, if it takes 5 months to give you an answer, we'll take 5 months.
Take 5 months. Well, that's
There's no sense.
bureaucracy anyway.
There's no sense of reduced fees, encouragement, or expedited effort.
Well, I think that's one of the differences between letting the markets move things in communities like your own. And so, Pastor, are you finding other pastors now encouraged by some of the things that they're seeing you do? And are we going to be able to perhaps develop out not just Capitol Heights, but start seeing other communities around the country develop out?
Yes, matter of fact, since I've been on, as a result of Cure, a lot of pastors around the country are calling me.
They are?
Yes.
Okay, well, I got to hear more about that, because I'm going to keep up to the wrap-up, because I want to know about that, especially since our policy summit's coming up. I'll be right back with our special panel right after this.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart, and we have sinned against God, and as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you have never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
I just think I have a problem with others deciding for local communities what they should do. Others outside, others here in Washington, D.C., that tell somebody that they should or should not have a business in their community just seems over the top. And so I have some special guests that want to weigh in on this with me. Some of them even agree with me. I'm hoping that Dr. Joel Griffith, you said you're a doctor of legal.
I am not a PhD. I am just an attorney.
Not a PhD.
But I'll take the upgrade to doctor.
Why? Because doctors do surgery too. So I think I'm going to leave you as a lawyer. And
I'm just a lawyer.
Okay. Well, just a lawyer is very meaningful for us. So thank you for being here, because you're with the Heritage Foundation, you're a research fellow there, and you're an expert in this area. So I want to make sure that we don't cross any legal lines when we talk about what people should or shouldn't do, as they demand of their politicians to treat them fairly when it comes to developing out their communities. Thank you for joining Cure America.
Thanks very
I
much.
have Dr. I'm going to call you doctor too, Henry Olson.
Yeah, well, I'm just an attorney too, so.
I'm just an attorney too. Everybody's just an attorney. You know, attorneys are on the short list like lobbyists.
Yeah, well, you know, Shakespeare said something about getting rid of them all at one point. So.
He did. He said, get rid of all the attorneys or the lobbyists?
Lawyers.
Or both. The lawyers.
First thing we
Well,
do is get rid of all the lawyers.
Well, I'm glad you're a lawyer. I'm glad you're an attorney. I'm glad you're a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and an opinion columnist for the Washington Post. And I'm glad you're regular with us,
Well, thank you.
because I appreciate your opinions when we take on these topics. And Dr. William Allen, you are a PhD doctor, actually,
I am
and not a
indeed.
lawyer, huh?
I am indeed, and I'm not a lawyer.
And not a lawyer. And that's why we appreciate the balance, the radical extreme. The lawyers will keep us both out of jail, I suppose. But welcome and thank you for being here again as Chief Operating Officer for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Hey guys, this is incredible. Here we have up in New York another business being run out by politicians because they don't think that that's what should happen. They'd rather have a Green New Deal out of Washington. What say you?
It's a shame to see this type of an assault on business development. This really is just par for the course. A lot of the politicians within New York City, they continue to pile on taxes and pile on regulations, and that is driving people out of the city, even pre-COVID. Of course, we've lost 400,000 in the last few months, but even pre-COVID, a lot of business people, a lot of entrepreneurs are already exiting that region because of all the hurdles. And here we have a situation in which a business, a real estate developer, wanted to actually redevelop an area by Brooklyn without tax incentives, without any special favors. They just wanted to have a place where they could bring in new businesses, and those local politicians shot it down. And it's there was no need for this.
Why, Dr. Allen, why is it that every time a developer tries to get into a poor community, there are politicians that say no?
Well, I hate to give you the answer. That's the true
You're not
answer.
a lawyer. You can tell me the truth.
Well, I am a political scientist, and I can tell you that it happens because of local control.
Okay.
And that's the dilemma that we're confronted with. Of course, communities should decide their own fate. But you have to look at what's happened in the pattern of politics, and especially in areas like the boroughs of New York City. It is not, strictly speaking, local control. Control really isn't in the hands of the people. It's in the hands of certain cliques who dominate. And so local politics is determining the outcome. And guess what those who have said no to development in Brooklyn are doing? They say we prefer to look to Washington.
Right.
We prefer to look to Albany to get handouts from them.
I'm wondering then, Henry, because did that politician come first, the city councilman, or how much did the congressional leaders, because 4 of them were opposed to this development and adamantly opposed, how much of it was their pressure on the local city council or any particular member on the city council? Because some wanted it. They were like, come on, guys, what are we doing here?
Well, yeah, people get elected for reasons, and they get elected because of alliances and, as Dr. Allen said, cliques. So it doesn't have to be one leading the other, that they're all responsive to the same elements of the community that is so far winning elections, and that is elements of the community that would prefer government-driven programs to private-driven development. And until that changes, you will continue to see these people call the shots in the area where they have the votes.
So do you believe, and I'm going to ask you this question, Joel, as well as all 3 of you, that the people there understand what their politicians are doing? Or is this just something that is beyond their understanding, that business is trying to come in and a politician that you've hired is saying, no, we don't want that one. We'd rather wait. We'd rather you stay poor until we wait for a better deal. Is I don't know that I would want to buy that they really get it, and then to drive this kind of entrepreneurship and enterprise out of their areas.
Yeah, I think a lot of the local residents actually don't understand what is going on behind closed doors, and many of them don't understand the special interests that are at play here. If you look at this particular development in Brooklyn, there are a lot of left-leaning environmental groups that actually only want a specific type of development. They want certain types of businesses and industries to be planted there. Of course, they don't have funding for that.
Right.
They don't have the resources for that, but they want to deny other businesses the opportunity and other people the opportunity to be gainfully employed. And the only people that are benefiting from this are the local politicians that are basically in the pockets of those radicalized left-wing environmental groups in this situation.
See, that's what I would lean toward, Henry, because if the people are not without resources right now, they don't have anything. And as was already pointed out by Joel, the area is already having trouble. New York, we all know post-COVID, New York is already suffering. Why would they want to fight against their own better interests for themselves and their family if they did have a deep understanding of what's going on?
Well, I don't know of this particular case what they understand or what they don't, but I do know that you can take a look and see that they have a general strong view of how the world ought to work, and that's how they cast their ballots and what they prioritize, and that is a view of the world that supports government-led development. It's a view that values the public over the private, and whether they know this particular development or not, it's pretty clear that the group that can win elections in places like this are the groups that prefer public not ownership, public redistribution and public guidance over private entrepreneurship. And that's...
Is it a trust problem? Is this what's going on here, Dr. Allen?
I think it is a trust problem. It's a confidence problem. These people don't believe in the pioneer launch, which is what every parent has to practice when they send finally the 18 to 20-year-old off into the world. You launch them, having provided for them, but not continuing to care for them. Well, these people don't believe in the pioneer launch. They don't think people should fail to be cared for when they've been launched. So they won't believe and accept a Homestead Act, which is a perfectly good thing to do from a social perspective. Society should do things like that, launch people, but then say, now you're on your own. They don't believe in that.
But then why don't they believe it? What broke down? Is it that they didn't learn in school? Is it because their families are broken? Because we do know that when you have this aggressive poverty in an area, the families are also poor now. Families are also in disarray and chaos.
Well, I've tended to believe, Star, that it's... take, for example, the case of Alexandria Occasional Cortex, who didn't think that Amazon could create $125,000 a year jobs. That's because she couldn't get one. She could only do this by going into Congress. But the rest of the community, left to their devices, would find a way into those jobs.
Yeah, you do have to wonder. I mean, she did go to college, she said, and then she went to work a bartender. So maybe she's not familiar. What do you think, Joel? Is this something that has just generationally gotten into certain psyches and certain communities to say we can't do it without a federal hand?
Well, with a lot of these communities, you have an entire generation, multi-generation of students that aren't learning the basics about how the economy works. We call this macroeconomics, which sounds scary, but when you actually learn these concepts, they're very fundamental to how our world works. And when you have students that don't have a basic understanding of economics, they don't have a basic understanding, oftentimes even of consumer math, and that's a failure of those schools, we shouldn't be surprised when these students grow up and they turn 18 and they go ahead and vote for politicians that perpetuate the failed economic policies of the past.
Yeah, but these are the same type people that will hustle on the corner, that will make ends meet, that will do what they have to do. So there is something in the gut. I just wonder, can it turn around? And I want to go into it more deeply in our next discussion. But Henry, I want to lead into the next panel to look at what we can do for others to make sure that they do get that understanding of microeconomics. What are you thinking about?
No, I think that it can turn around. What you have to do, though, is meet people where they are. And a lot of times in these areas where they are is in places where they haven't had as much success in their lives, and they need to be taught or encouraged to find that success in their lives. And they may not see themselves as the sort of person who would be desirable by an employer to come in the neighborhood. And I think that sort of work, which is often done by nonprofit groups, can be very helpful in helping to give people a sense of ownership over their lives, which then allows them to say, I want to own my community, and encourage other people who have that sense sense of self-pride and ownership to make their way into our community and with their lives.
That's why I like what Pastor Duggar's doing in his community over in Capitol Heights, and I think it can be an example for others. But Dr. Allen, I guess I just don't buy it because, first of all, we're talking about a community of people who've grown up on TV. They know what it is to have. They know what it is to desire. They also are the ones that go and get the Gucci when they get opportunity to break in someone else's window. So it's not like there's not that impetus there. Why is it that they keep just settling for letting somebody else bring this in through a green deal or bring this in from federal hand? I'm just wondering how much role of envy is in there instead of saying this is not rocket science. These people were really coming in here and going to revitalize our entire community and make it beautiful and better, and then we'd rather not.
A sense of entitlement, I think, is the answer to your question. Yes, there's lots of envy in terms of the expression of resentment around the country, but this specific problem comes from people bred to entitlement and therefore losing the sense of what their obligation is to do for themselves. That's why I say that what we've lost is a confidence in the pioneer launch. And what it takes to respond to that is simply to say to people, fly, bird, fly. And if you fall, it's on you.
Okay, but can they do it? You think people can fly? What if what if the government doesn't show up? What if the green jobs don't show up?
Well, a lot of this is on the burden of the people that are actually living there. And people have to make that choice. And unfortunately, because of the upbringing, because of education, some people are less inclined to make those decisions. And those that are inclined often are leaving because the burden.
That's true, especially now. When we're seeing the health of the community. In fact, I think a lot of data is pointing to when you have healthy family life, husbands married to mother children, they're the ones getting up out of there. So I don't mean to interrupt your point, but I agree with you.
So if you look at places like Newark, New Jersey, or Philadelphia, New York City, you look at the burden, the tax burden on working families that are making, say, $75,000 a year between two people with a $250,000 home. You're going to spend $11,000 to $12,000 a year in some of those cities just in city taxes.
Wow.
That's about $9,000 to $10,000 more per year than in other thriving cities, such as Jacksonville, Florida, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Houston, Texas. So those that have the means, meaning the job to do so and that willpower, many of them are fleeing in a very literal way.
I know they are. It's really, because when you go to those other places, everyone says, don't bring your values with you. Don't change us to blue and leave and make us a New York as well. So Henry, I'm just wondering if we can start from the very basics, you know, to get into the education, to start teaching economics so that people can realize their own lives in the communities that they grew up in and their parents grew up in. Will this turn around?
I think it can turn around. You know, I certainly think that we should be teaching basics of economics in high school and in junior high school when certainly people can understand it. It's if we can teach them about the basics of environmental science, we can teach them about the basics of economic science. But the most important thing is to teach people a sense of pride, a sense that they can achieve things in life, that they're not the victims.
Yeah, I really think that point is even more important than teaching them economics because come on, they know how to play crap games. We know how to we know how to make money, if you will. I used to live on welfare. That part, it was easy to try to make a little bit more. I think that it gets to your point, Dr. Allen, that they just lost their confidence. How do we get that back?
I hate to be beating a drum, but letting people go.
You're not a lawyer.
Letting people go. I think we fall
Let
into
them go? Just kick them out the nest?
Yes, we fall into the trap of thinking if we only do something, they will respond and everything will be all right. No. Throw them on their own resources and own devices. Let them define their own circumstances.
So if nothing comes in there, oh well. And if everybody healthy just leaves, it just lives like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do then when we come back from break, I want to go into another tale of another city. We looked at New York, but in Detroit, they're actually making differences right now because they learned the hard way. That part didn't work, so they want something new. We'll be right back.
Today, a student in public school will pray or lead a Bible study. Today, a pastor will preach boldly the truth of the Scriptures without fear of the IRS. Today, the life of an innocent child will be saved, and a mother will experience the joy of a newborn baby. A distraught woman will find hope and choose life rather than death. Today, there is a strong voice defending God's created natural order of marriage and family. There is a defender of freedom in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress and in legislative bodies across the land. Today, all of this is possible because of the ministry of Liberty Counsel. People from all over America will find help and hope because of Liberty Counsel. The adversity they face will be turned into victory. Case by case, law by law, person by person, Liberty Counsel is advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family through litigation, education, and public policy. And that is the mission of Liberty Counsel, to restore the culture by advancing life, liberty, and family.
I just wish everybody had that ingenuity that could get up and go. Maybe that is the church's role, is to encourage people that they can do this. Because Dr. Allen, we're seeing in Detroit a turnaround.
Yes.
Everyone thought Detroit was over. Joel, you talk about displacement. I mean, this was a 2 million people city that dropped down to like 600,000 people. It was barren. And then they hired a manager. He said, well, we can sell off the art and we can do all these things to re-energize ourselves. And now they have a new city councilman who's bringing business back. What can you tell us about why those folks are saying okay? Is it just they trust their politician?
It may be, Star, that in Detroit they were down so long there was no way up, nowhere to go but up.
Okay.
Remember when the recession hit in 2008, they had been in recession already for the previous 6 years.
That's right.
So that they didn't realize anything had changed when the rest of the country fell into that situation. They've been struggling for years to try to find a way to recover. They still haven't completely rebuilt from the devastations of 1968 and the rioting. So that there's an urgent need and an urgent sense in Detroit that we must finally do something. So what's happened there, inviting Amazon in, inviting industry in, is a good sign, but it's only one of the signs they need, because we don't need to rely on finding large-scale industry or the counterpart to globalization on a local scale. We've got to be able to reinvigorate piecework. We've got to reinvigorate all the small investments that actually make a community thrive. And the focus ought to be there. And if bringing in Amazon gives you the chance to say to people, now you take advantage of this and start your own little business, all to the good.
Well, all to the good, and then that means it takes leadership. Because Henry, you mentioned in the last segment that the people are there and they're just doing really the best that they can with what they have. But this city councilman there, he took the initiative, I suppose you could say, away from the people and said, we're going to do this. We're going to revitalize and maybe even bring in the type of environment that we need. So is leadership failing in many of these instances to where the folks then get to say, well, we don't know what to do, so we're not going to do anything?
Yeah, I think leadership and people who are open to trying new things is something that can be very important. I mean, Detroit is a city that's been down for so long, it doesn't remember when it was up. And for somebody to be able to say, let's wait for Lansing, let's wait for Washington. Well, they've been waiting for Lansing and Washington for 50 years. And the money's come in different projects, and it still hasn't changed the city. So for them, it's in a different place than Brooklyn. And for them, it's a place where this is something they have to try, and it's a good idea that they're trying because they've tried everything else.
And so, Joel, you know about the Opportunity Zone Initiative. I think that this has a lot to do with why we're seeing some momentum in Detroit, because although Detroit has gotten a bad rap, I think, about the devastation that's there in its most pocketed and hard entrenched zip codes, the city itself is big. It's nice. Their airport's fabulous. So it's not that it's absolutely 100% pro. Tell us what you know about the opportunity zones, and is this an opportunity for us as a society to say, hey, you guys can do this, but we're not going to help you do it through the federal government, but you can do it?
I think the opportunity zones are well-intentioned. There is certainly a desire on the proponents of those zones to place capital back in these local communities. However, I'd be wary of relying on those to actually revitalize these neighborhoods in these cities. We have a long storied past over the decades of doing place-based subsidies, which is what these are. We're incentivizing an investment in one geographic location compared to another. And if those underlying cultures within, I'm talking about the political cultures within these communities, do not change, there won't actually be a lasting impact for those that are suffering right now from those accumulated bad decisions of political leaders over the decades. Sure, you might have some real estate companies or some property owners within that area benefit individually, but those that have not been educated properly, those that have been really a subject of these communities, they're not going to be the ones benefiting. If you look at downtown New Orleans, some of the downtown area that they were able to lobby and get that designation, well, that's not helping those that are impoverished there.
Right there. This is fascinating because, Dr. Allen, when the idea first came on the table, I loved it. I thought, wow, this is great. You're going to reduce the capital burden on money. It's fungible. It'll go into communities and help those communities, and the locals will help them decide how to develop their community, and that's not what we saw. We did see a heavy hand from Washington come in to say, okay, here's how we're going to help you do that. So it's almost like the right is doing what the left is doing. Thank you for bringing that up, to not allow the people at the table. And then you have to figure out a way to work with the politicians, the very ones that are already trying to keep industry out. What should the locals actually do to get out of this scenario? It's like they're being pawned.
I don't think there's a single answer to that. It is certainly true, I agree, that transient policies seldom produce lasting change. And that's what happens when you develop policies like the opportunity zones or their predecessors. It's transient, which means that there will be capital that flows in, but it flows in usually only to flow out. So what you're asking is, how can we have a resident capital infrastructure that remains in place and continues to develop in those communities? And the only answer we've ever found, and you've been reading Jane Jacobs and others, the only answer we've ever found to that question is when it's indigenous to the place.
I think so. You're right. And that's why I think that they missed an opportunity with this business developer who said, I will work with you. If this is a local business person in your state who has a track record and he's willing to work with you to do this, it seems like it would be a better scenario than waiting for a politician to come in. Although one point, and Henry, you might even be able to weigh on it, is on the capital that was coming in. It did have, through the opportunity zone, it did have to stay there for 10 years. It wasn't like it was coming in just to leave.
Yeah, I mean, what happens, I think, with community redevelopment is that people need to develop themselves.
Okay.
That if you have a case of gentrification where people come in from the outside to pursue the capital area, you can completely revitalize a place, but simply displace the people who are already there to somewhere else.
Right.
You don't change their lives, you just change their old homes. And that's what we have to resist.
Talk about that for a minute, though, because, and I want you to weigh in on this too, Joe, all through, because this is where now the rubber is meeting the road. This is what people are afraid of. They don't call it revitalization. They call it gentrification. They say, you come in with your money, I have to move. I'm a renter. My rent's going to go up. The property tax is going to go up against the people that are rent, that are owners of the properties. The renting of the space for the business is going to go up. And so now I've kept my business here for 30 years, but now the rent's high and the management wants me out. We do have to address that question. Is there a displacement that happens that we should be concerned about to maybe be a little more open for a role of government?
Well, when we're talking about opportunity zones in particular, oftentimes what that is doing is it's incentivizing resources that would have been used outside the zone into the zone. So it's really an artificial, premature gentrification. But those cities that have seen an economic renaissance over the past that's founded on true reforms, if you look at the tax reforms in Tennessee or North Carolina over the years, that's been a lasting impact because it's actually changed the economic climate for everyone who wants to venture out into business.
Doctor, I see you're shaking your head in agreement with Joe, but I'm just not sure that in those zip codes, I'm not dismissive that we shouldn't target money into certain zip codes. If it's like, if you're going to get an incentive, you bring your money over here, I'm going to give you a better interest rate. We shop around for that. So I'm just not sure that I'm 100% opposed to this ability to put capital into our most distressed zip codes.
Yeah, well, but you see, it seems to me the economic argument is like this. It is not where the savings bank is, it's how much interest they pay. So bringing capital into these areas is one thing, even requiring it to stay there for 10 years. But the important question is the return on investment. What's the ROI and where does that go?
Right.
Does it go back into that community? Not necessarily so.
Right.
So it's really important to be sensitive in evaluating this and understand that unless the people there are reaping the fruit, as it were, unless they're resting under their own vine and fig tree, which they get only because they tilled the soil and made it grow, they don't have anything to boast of.
No. Then I'm thinking that the churches should be involved. Somebody needs to be at the
Precisely.
table more than the politician, because this isn't working for the people that live in these neighborhoods. They're not changing. They're not. Their schools are still broken year after year after year. Their families are still broken. We talk about now police and systemic and all of these other factors, and yet when there are some ideas thrown on the table to say, how do we gentrify? How do we thrive this area? We only hear from government to get that done. What is the answer from the market side?
Well, let me just say quickly, I think if the government doesn't start out by saying first work, you will have no plan that will work.
Ooh. First, work, the people.
Yes.
Government needs to say, you're going to work. So it doesn't matter that, I don't care that they're only bringing $15 an hour. It shouldn't matter to you whether they have $150,000, Ms. Congresswoman. Work.
Yes.
Is that an answer?
Well, we have to get to what is the underlying cause of the problem of the fact that some people don't want
work.
to work. And I think a lot of this does come down, of course, family life, but education is a big component. And if you look at places such as Arizona, for instance, where each and every child, you have an opportunity basically to get access to about $6,000 worth of state funding to go ahead and choose basically a school of your choice. That's a way to actually stop this cycle of those that are born into families that are already in an area where they're not getting a good education, not equipped to seize opportunities. This is a way to break that cycle. Because the fact is, once you have that desire to actually attain and achieve, you realize this entire country has the potential to be an opportunity zone.
Well, that's
right?
true. I like that idea, but you talked about that entitlement mentality. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dr.
but I just have to take a minor exception while agreeing as an educator. Of course, I agree with the emphasis on education, but I have to say, I've never met a human being anywhere who didn't have a desire to eat, no matter what the level of education.
It's true. It's true. So is education the only way? Of getting back to what you were saying about even learning concepts of economics. I don't know that I buy that. Everybody understands nickel. And in fact, I was looking at this thing the other day, and it was said, the question on the table was, okay, how much money would have to be on the ground if you were going to pick it up? And one of the people said $5. And the answer, the majority said 1 penny. So I'm not sure that you have to have a degree in economics to understand that you have to work.
Yeah, no, and it's one thing that government policy did in the 90s was say if you receive aid for what used to be called aid to families with dependent children, you had to at least make a work effort.
Yeah.
And that's what people want to extend to other government benefits, which is not to say we're just going to eliminate these programs, but we're going to say you need to at least make an effort to give back and better yourselves. And I think extending that could do a lot for helping to improve the lives of people in these areas.
That was welfare reform, and we haven't heard much about it since the 90s. I'm wondering, in fact, I consulted on that project, and I know one of the challenges was that the governors could opt out of doing it. There was no real penalty to say, if you don't implement these means tests, these new rules, you're going to lose your federal funding. So I'm wondering if this is something that over Heritage Foundation, they're encouraging people to consider a second round of welfare reform.
You know, there's no doubt we need more flexibility for individuals, but a lot of this, too, the onus is on the state and local governments that have put so many hurdles in front of people that want to succeed, right? We price people out of the marketplace with minimum wage. We have occupational licensing that makes it so difficult for so many entrepreneurs to get off the ground. And in a lot of these communities, there really are a lack of job opportunities because the regulations to actually just get your business doors open are so extreme.
They are, but this president has changed a lot of those dynamics on a national level. But Dr. Allen, that's why I'm not sure, and I think, Henry, you were making the point that the people are complicit with the politician. I'm just not sure. I think that part of his point is that people are not giving the individuals that live there enough credit just to let them live free, that they are demanding of them these perfect scenarios, otherwise we're not going to assist you. This business was not asking for any government concessions. They weren't asking for anything but for the people to work. If you move the zoning just a little bit, we will revitalize this community and provide jobs, provide newness. So I don't know if it's just the people. I think the politicians are guilty and need to be removed.
Well, but of course that falls to the people to perform. And
I don't know that they know to do it.
Certainly they do it in one sense, at one level. But frankly, they are seduced.
They are seduced. That's why it's important what Pastor Duggar is doing. And he's found a new friend, and we're going to talk to him a little bit so that that will catch on, so we can revitalize these communities. I really want to know how to plan a community. I'm frankly tired of the distressed zip codes, 8,700 of them. I'm tired of month after month, year after year, generation after generation now. We keep telling poor people, just wait, we'll get there, and it's not happening. And I'm so glad that you're my guest because, Pastor, you're now a mentor to me. You're encouraging me because you've decided you're going to take a hold of your community. So thank you and welcome back to the wrap-up section because I want to get a little bit more into your story. And then Dr. Bob and your meeting, it just providential hand of God got you out of Newport Beach, brought you out here right at the same time that Pastor is trying to take his community. So thank you because we've had discussion. It's not the politicians. Our panel has decided, lawyers and all. It's not the politicians, just not going to do that. The people themselves, they're trapped. They're trapped in failing schools, broken families. As one of the lawyers pointed out, Joel said, we can't wait for the Opportunity Zone initiative. The money comes in and doesn't stay anyway. All of this government is not the answer. So I think it's going to be up to you and your folks in your church.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Well, how did y'all meet? What happened? When you knew, okay, I'm now over my head. I'm learning about feasibility studies and development initiatives, and you find out that Georgetown University has a program because you started inquiring. This is what pastors have to do, just started inquiring. In your inquiring, you found that Georgetown has a program. You're ahead of the program, and so what happened next?
So the Economic Development Corporation gave me Pastor Duggar's phone number and said, call him. He's interested in a study. So I called him, and he answered in a very quiet voice. And I introduced myself, and I said, I'm calling, this is Dr. Bob, and we do the Georgetown studies. I'd like to talk to you. And he said, I'm presiding over a funeral right now. Okay. Can you call me later?
Forgot to turn your phone off, huh? But I think that that's interesting because that's the work of the church. And so since then, you've been fast friends. You saw the need and beautiful property to go in and develop and have him become a part of the community. I want to ask you a little bit about your program. I'm going to call you pastor because you're pastoring pastors now to help them understand that they have value and they have a role in helping the local community that's wondering what to do next. So you say problem one is how can churches sustain themselves in a time of declining congregations and rising expenses? How can they?
Many churches, like First Baptist of Capitol Heights, acquired their excess land decades ago when the congregations were growing, and they felt that as the congregations would grow, they would need that property. They bought it at a much lower price point decades ago. In the case of First Baptist, they're sitting on more than an acre of land that has not, it's been fallow for 70 years.
Wow.
So it's been sitting there as an asset unused. Now our communities have grown. These communities that you're talking about need new housing, revitalization, jobs, opportunity in these communities, not far out in the suburbs that pass them over.
Okay.
So by doing a feasibility study with my students in the Masters of Real Estate program at Georgetown, we are able to demonstrate with total certainty that a affordable housing project for seniors will work on that site.
Okay.
The students work with us on the number of units, the floors, elevators, common area space, parking, all those issues. So they could say, Pastor Duggar, here's the project. We determined we could build 76 affordable senior units on his fallow land that's been sitting there vacant for 70 years.
Well, it's beautiful property, and so now you're moving into, okay, let's do this, congregation. Are the people of the community saying, what's next? We're excited with you. Is this someplace that you're seeing a new vision for leadership of those that are, just kind of sitting on the front porch watching life go by?
Well, the people in the community are excited because, first of all, I'm very engaged in the community.
Yes, that is true.
I'm
and you
always-
have been for a long time. So go ahead. Yes.
And I found that people want to know the greatest fear when people don't know. If you inform them and you help them to articulate what's going on around them and the need rather than just bringing things in, because people are typically used to buildings coming in or developers coming in. The next day they see a building. They don't pay the sign in their mind that says hearing, and they don't go to the hearing.
Right.
So I become the hero for them, and I engage them in the process.
Okay.
So as they understand the process and the need, and holistically how the church and the business community, schools, everybody works together, and especially the vision that we have.
Yeah.
It's inclusive of everyone.
Of everyone, I know.
And so they're
you got
excited.
everything. In fact, when you told me that, even daycares are going to be a part of it now. But I think you hit on something that's a key component in why I, at Cure, have always been interested in church and the capacity they have in their community is because they already trust you. You are a part of the community. So when we say, well, okay, we're going to go do this now, I don't know where we're going, but I trust you, so I don't have to worry that you're going to take me somewhere that it's going to hurt me. Because problem number two, Dr. Bob, pastors are not developers. Developers want our land. We do not speak the same language, and that's where you come in to assist the church.
This was the most difficult component to put together, because if you think about this from a perspective of each entity, a developer thinks in the term of 3 to 5 years. I put my money in, I build something, I sell it. That's how I make my profit. The church thinks in a time frame of 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
Far beyond his lifetime as pastor, far beyond my lifetime.
Right.
Longevity and legacy is the name of the game for the church.
Right.
So we came up with a very unique concept of creating a 55-year ground lease, which allows the church to have the security to know that they're going to keep their land forever. And at the end of the lease term, they're going to own the buildings free and clear.
Wow.
Along the way, during that 55-year lease term, they participate in the cash flow of the project,
Right.
not a ground lease payment.
Yeah.
I was talking to a church
Just so
just this week, and they had leased their land next door, and they get $700 a month. They agreed to that 10 years ago. Now $700 a month isn't much. And 20 years from now, it's not going to be much at all. And 30 years from now, it's going to be nothing.
That's right.
So this way, they participate in the cash flow and the success of the project.
And the growth of it. And what's really interesting is it also, as you brought up, Pastor Douglas, the community is going with you, and they're going
Yes.
with you because people don't want to move from their community.
That's
They
right.
like where they live. And I think that by having the pastor lead through a development project, it is still development, it's
Yes.
still growth, but it's with leadership and trust, ownership, love, and generational thought. So this is just beautiful. So I only have a few more minutes, so I want to know, what if somebody wants to get in touch with you?
Well, they could reach me, Dr. Bob, at drbob.us
Okay.
is my personal number, but they could reach me through Georgetown University.
Georgetown
and
University.
we'll be happy to do a study for them.
That would be amazing. Look what you started, Pastor Duggar. And Pastor Duggar will be at the Cure Policy Summit coming up in 2 weeks. Go to urbancure.org to find out when.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart, and we have sinned against God, and as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you've never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
Well, my distinguished panel gave us a lot to think about and talk about as we sort through what we can do to help our nation's poor. And I tell you, I was really encouraged with Pastor Duggar's story because there are appropriate comparisons to the collapse of the Jamestown Development Project in Brooklyn, and they're being made to the killing of Amazon's initiative in 2014 to build a new headquarters on Long Island City. High-profile opposition from the left, including New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was against it, and like Brooklyn City Council member Carlos Menchaca, who just killed this deal, Cortez celebrated Amazon's decision to kill the project, and both of them questioned projections of jobs that would be created. You know, what of the people were even asked about this? You know, what Cortez said is that people were saying 25,000 jobs at 125,000 average would come here, and that has never happened anywhere. Well, just over recent weeks, Amazon announced 33,000 corporate and technology jobs opening across the country, offering a total annual compensation of $150,000, including salary and stock awards. And the company also just announced expansion of its workforce by 100,000, with pay beginning at $15 an hour plus benefits. And earlier in the year, at the beginning of the pandemic, Amazon hired 175,000 temporary workers, and this May they announced that 70% would be retained permanently. Waiting for a Green New Deal doesn't sound like a great plan to bring down poverty rates in Brooklyn. And yet, in contrast to New York, a new Detroit City Councilman, Roy McAllister Jr., he recently wrote an exuberant column about Amazon's plan to bring 1,200 jobs to his district in a new development that will bring Detroit $43 million, he said, in new tax revenue in the 10 years following opening the facility. Detroit appears to have learned from its nanny state mistakes and is moving back towards job creation and investment, free enterprise, and economic recovery. You know, anyone that cares about the poor, that cares about our nation's recovery and growth, they should consider that community is local, that God delivers the poor in their affliction and opens their ears in oppression, and that poor people have talents and energies to be discovered and encouraged, and they have to take a role in that. They should not be stifled by leftist politicians waiting for big government projects or green pipe dreams. You know, hopefully some of the folks that live in a community that could use some revitalization will consider these two council stories, two different city councils, two different cities. As they go into the voting booth to elect their local and congressional leadership this November, hopefully they're thinking about their community, their neighborhood, their family. And in the meantime, we should consider that sometimes the best way to help the poor is just to get out of their way and simply pray that the uniqueness of community to creatively plan their own destiny, their own neighborhoods, will flourish under the winds and wings of freedom. I hope you will think again with me next week on Cure America. Oh, and remember to visit my website, urbancure.org, to send me a note and to get a copy of this show to share with your family and friends. Thanks for watching again, and God bless. Have I got some good news for you? Due to the pandemic, Cure is opening an opportunity that we've never had before for general populations, and people like you. We actually host an annual policy summit for clergy. It's very exclusive, very private. We bring clergy from all over the country to Washington, D.C. that are serving in some of our hard-hit communities. And because of pandemic this year, we're taking it online. So now it's going to be open to even you. You want to get details, visit our website, urbancure.org, urbancure.org, and sign up. It will be virtual. We'll have our clergy council here in Washington, D.C., but the rest of it is up to you to come in and hear from experts on how to break the cycle of poverty. This year's theme is the state of Black America, and I'd love to visit with you online during this wonderful time that an emergency in our society has opened up so that you can participate with us. urbancure.org.